Greetings, BookTube. Welcome to part 1 of my 3-part review of The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. This review will be divided into 3 parts because this book is so long, I have so many thoughts, and I might lose my thoughts if I don't. If I do it all in one review, it'll probably take way too long. So, dividing this book up into 3 parts. I finished reading part 1 of The Tale of Genji, which is about Genji's youth and rise. I have a checklist here, so to make sure I stay on track. Bullet point checklist. So, this book is supposedly the world's first novel. Novel in the way we understand it. Intentionally fictional, not based on oral traditions, one author, not collections of previous myths, none of that. That's what things like the Epic of Gilgamesh is. It's a collection of older myths updated for a later time. This is an entirely original work from one author, written in her contemporary period, which was medieval Japan. Murasaki Shikibu was a woman in the imperial court of Japan at the time, which was called the Heian period, from roughly 794 to 1185 CE. She wrote the novel no later than, say, 1021 CE, because most of the book takes place in the 900s. And so her narrative style is a little bit like a woman having a conversation with another woman, gossiping about the goings-on in the royal palace. So that's her narrative style. And the book is very heavy in Buddhist themes. So if suggestions of the if not outright supernatural, but if suggestions of the supernatural are described in the book, it's what the people of that era genuinely perceived to be true, because this was not the age of enlightenment. This was the Middle Ages, after all. So they genuinely believed in things like curses and demons, etc., etc. And there's very heavy Buddhist themes about reaching nirvana and reincarnation. Murasaki Shikibu was a devout Buddhist. Now, a bit about the translation history. The first translation was written by a Japanese man in the United Kingdom, a man named Kencho Suematsu, who translated the first 17 chapters of The Tale of Genji into English in the 1880s. Yes, the 1880s, but it was at the time considered a very poor translation. Nevertheless, it was a labor of love to show his British colleagues, his British friends, Japanese culture. And there were later English translations into the 20th century that were complete translations. So there was one from the 1920s which had all the chapters except one of them. but the translation was not very loyal to, was not very literal. It was written in a style that was ideal for Western readers. This translation is from 2001 from a man named let me see here, Royal Tyler. So I'm reading the Royal Tyler translation, which is the first complete translation faithfully in the style of medieval Japanese, the way it's written. And more on the way it's written a little bit later in the review. So there were, let's see, 5 English translations, and the first one was only a partial translation. When I bought this book, I didn't realize that this was only an abridged version. This is the complete translation. As you can see, it is massive. Now, a little bit about the history that I learned in this book, like the Buddhist themes, for instance. Forgive me, it is raining outside. Hopefully it won't rain too hard that it interrupts the sound. It was very inspirational to later generations of Japanese, and that it was very influential in Japanese culture overall, particularly in the role of host or hostess, entertaining guests. I didn't do my research, but I think the Tale of Genji, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the Tale of Genji reminds me of geisha culture. You know those women who who have all that white makeup, and they are skilled in the art of conversation. Conversation, not, the art of conversation, the art of entertaining guests. That is what I think this book inspired in many generations of Japanese, that you ought to be a good host to your guests. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that's what my perception is from reading this book. So, was this a pre-existing culture, or did this inspire later generations? You tell me. Another thing I learned about medieval Japan is the succession of the emperor is not automatic. It's not a lifetime service of an emperor. An emperor can retire, and it doesn't automatically go to their firstborn son. It's still within the family. The emperor's succession is still within the nobility, but they sometimes choose based on who is most qualified and the circumstances, like the state of their successor's health, for instance, their qualifications, their education, etc. So it's not automatically the firstborn son who becomes the emperor. So you don't have these boy kings in like they do in medieval Europe. They don't have like a 5-year-old sitting on the throne with a crown and then having a regent govern the country. None of that. Emperors are appointed with a degree of evaluation before they succeed the throne, when an emperor chooses to retire or dies. And this book does not talk about the warrior culture of Japan, samurai. The warrior culture, I think, was something that came later. This book also emphasizes that Japan was heavily influenced by Chinese culture. So they always talk about the Chinese style of doing things. The Chinese this, the Chinese that. Yes, medieval Japan, medieval Japanese people were, at least the nobles, at least the royals, were very, very admiring of Chinese culture. And like I said, this was before the rise of the warrior class. Okay, the Heian period was a bit more of a period of the arts. Um, and there are many superstitions in the story, like at certain times of year they sleep in certain wings of the palace or the mansion. So this time of year you sleep in this time of day you spend in the west wing, and the other time of day you spend in the east wing. Something about the sunshine. Um, Maybe I think that's part of feng shui, right? Although I don't know about feng shui. I don't know about feng shui. But it's about what time of day you spend in each wing based on the sunshine shining in from windows. Uh, there was some kind of superstition behind that. They also, and they take this very seriously, doctors read people's fortunes by feeling up the bumps on a person's head. So Genji had some kind of phrenologist. I don't remember the right word, but someone touches it up his head, sort of like palm reading, and says, "Oh, you are going to rise to greatness one day. You are XYZ in your personality." And the characters in the book and the author herself, actually take that very seriously. So you can see how far along we've gotten in our history, how far along we've gone. Excuse me. Now, let's talk about the story itself. Okay? Prince Genji. So this story is about a Japanese prince. His highs and his rises and falls, his highs and lows throughout his life, throughout his political career as a noble. Spoiler alert, he never becomes emperor. He never becomes emperor, but he does become a very influential force within the emperor's court. Multiple emperors, I might add. And the story does not focus on politics. So there is nothing about maneuvering armies. There's no talk about palace intrigue. There's nothing about economic management. None of that. Murasaki Shikibu believed that women ought not to participate in politics. She was a woman of her time. The only politics in this book is rising through the ranks via promotion. So there are these ceremonies where they put on these really elaborate decorative robes, and they're color coded so that their office reflecting their office. So in this book, the various characters aspire to take up various roles, like captain of the guard of the Eastern Gate, or secretary of the inner chamber of the palace. They just there's all these titles that the children of the nobles aspire to get promoted to. And so there's a lot of emphasis on you need to be prepared, you need to be educated, you need to be well-mannered, and you need to kiss the rings of the right higher-ups to get promoted. So there's a lot of that going on in the book. The beginning of the book is mostly, like 99%, Genji's love life. So he is married, but this is the early part of the book, okay? He goes around pursuing women. And he sees a woman he admires, and he says, I can make that woman dress better. I can give her a nice dress. I can teach her to play a musical instrument, and I can educate her on the skills of conversations. So a woman has to know when to hold her tongue, but when she is permitted to speak, she must speak. You choose her words wisely, and she must be entertaining but not pushy. She must be intriguing but not pushy. There's one chapter in the book which talks about the standards of how women should conduct themselves, and Genji tries to mold these women into his ideal woman. But then he gets quickly bored and moves on to his next project for a woman, for making the ideal woman. There was even a girl who was like a 9 to 10-year-old child, and he was in his late teens, sort of like someone from. So, okay. No. I think that's the wrong equivalent. But imagine, if you will, at least this was the image I got from the book. Imagine, if you will, a high school senior sees a kindergartner and says, I'm going to teach her the ways of how to be a proper woman so that in the future she's going to be my girlfriend and I'm going to marry her. So he was molding women into his ideal form, all the while being married to a woman he was distant to. But that's just the first few chapters. He actually gets in trouble eventually. All his flirtation, all his pursuits of women eventually get him in trouble with the other nobles, and he is kicked out of the royal palace and sent into temporary exile. He is eventually called back to assist the emperor in the day-to-day duties. And a lot of the communication between people who are in love with each other, it's not just Genji and his various women that he pursues. It's also several of his associates, his family, and the other people in the royal court, other Japanese nobles with their various relationships. Because they spend a lot of time apart, because this was an era before telephones, they wrote letters to each other, and it's usually coded with a lot of poetry. They use a lot of analogies about trees growing, about flowing water, about a bird perched in a tree. There's all this they write back and forth together poetry as a means of communicating their feelings with each other. So there's a lot of that going on in this book, in the tale of Genji. A lot of poetry. They just keep writing letters to each other. Anyways, moving on. But later, the latter part of part 1, it becomes less about Genji's pursuit of women and more about the intricate relationships between the royals, like how usually it describes their feelings towards each other. There's a lot about women expressing their longing or their frustration that a man keeps pursuing them even though they don't want him. That's true. Or that a man's longing for a woman or a woman's longing for a man, and they write all this long poetry because sometimes they're in separate towns or cities, but sometimes they even miss each other just because they're forced to live in separate wings of a mansion or a palace. So they constantly correspond in letters saying, "Oh, why do I have to bear this life without you in this gilded cage?" And so there's a lot of that going on. And so it's also about various living arrangements. Genji, in later years, in his mansion that he built, he has a lot of his female friends live with him. no longer as lovers, but he still has like an attachment to them. So he says, okay, you live in this wing, you live in this wing, you live in this wing. And then the women get jealous of each other, saying, why aren't you coming over to my room more often, Genji? So he gathers, like, for lack of a better term, a harem of women, and they express their frustration that spends more time in one wing of the palace of his personal mansion than another. And it also talks about Genji, a little bit about Genji's role as a... It also shows Genji's education of his 2 children that he does have to rise through the ranks, which I mentioned earlier. And he also at one point played the role of matchmaker. Like, it's not his woman that he's trying to marry, but he's trying to make a match for his son or for his closest ally, his closest friends. He says, I will arrange circumstances for you two to meet and have conversations so that you can fall in love and get married. Now, the society, even with confrontations, people in this book the characters are all overly polite, if you ask me. You'll never hear someone say, your mother was a whore. They will say something like this. I am afraid you and your mother have had your reputations irreversibly compromised. It would be much better for all of us if you were to withdraw from society for a period of time. That's the closest thing you can get to an insult in this book. Or, oh, you treat... Or no. Maybe, oh, you treat me with such a cruel manner. That is what you get. So there is the society in medieval Japan is overly polite. Another thing I must note is there are no name. A lot of people are referred to by their titles and not their actual birth names, and the way they're called. For example, Genji is called His Grace. He's a chancellor, and the emperor is called His Majesty, and there's another person called His Excellency or Her Highness, there are so many. There's such a large cast of characters that are not referred to by their names. I get confused sometimes. That's why some of the older translations refer to characters by their names rather than their titles. But the thing is, there is so much repetitiveness in this book that some of these characters are personal struggles are irrelevant because they're all about just living here and trying to get in communication with another person. And there's a lot of talk about home decorating and rebuilding your palace, rebuilding your mansion, renovations and decorations. So all that to say is the stories have so many repeating themes that some of these other minor characters are irrelevant, and I find myself sometimes my eyes are glazing over and I don't bother to keep track of every single character. Even though there are some character flow charts, some character what do you call it? The character profiles in the back of this book. So, that's that. And so, the last, well, no, not the last thing. So, Genji, what kind of person is Genji anyway? Genji is a little bit of a weirdo. He's the kind of man who likes having tea parties. He will have a tea party with his grandmother, if he had a surviving grandmother, or his mother. He will have a tea party with his daughter, a fake one. Pinky rise! So, and he likes playing music and dressing up and decorating. He is someone who indulges his female companions a lot. And I think the term is he's a straight man. Maybe he's closeted, I don't know. Probably not. He's a straight man with a lot of flamboyant tendencies. A little bit like... I don't want to compare him to some other historical characters. But he's a dandy, essentially. And he just loves his holding parties. He just loves holding parties with a lot of women holding attention to him. But sometimes he plays musical instruments and writes calligraphy and plays board games with his men as well. And he gets drunk with sake, I assume. So yeah, the book, other than people describing their longing for each other, because there goes my light, their longing for each other. Other than that, that they write in poetry, it's just an endless procession of parties and ceremonies, coming of age ceremonies where children put on new robes. Religious festivals, music parties where people are playing various stringed instruments, and people admiring their gardens. It's a whole lot of that. And here's the thing. The book talks about the lives of the Japanese nobility. I prefer to have a historical story told from the perspective of commoners, of peasants, because that's the people, excuse me, that I would relate to. I want to hear the lives of people who are less well off. That's just my personal preference. People who are not in a position of privilege, because they're the overwhelming masses. I just want to see the lives of ordinary people. Maybe they're less interesting, yes, but it is more about the reality on the ground, as opposed to the small minority of the nobles. I prefer that, so in that sense, this book is not for me. I must say that had this book been published today, I probably wouldn't be reading it. But it is the world's first novel, so I really, really wanted to give it a try. Now, if there's one takeaway I can get from the Tale of Genji is, one lesson I can learn is, live a beautiful domestic life. So, spend a lot of time with your wife and kids. Go on a road trip. Participate in religious ceremonies. Go to church or the temple if you are religiously inclined. Have family nights. Play board games with them. Learn to play a musical instrument. Learn how to make paintings and do artwork. Live a blissful domestic life. If there is any takeaway, if there's any value that you can get out of Genji, is live a blissful domestic life. Ignore the roles that they assign to women, like women must know their place in society. That is like, no, I don't like that at all. But treat your women and treat your family and friends. Shower them with gifts. Shower them with your attention. Give them a lot of your time when you are not busy doing politics. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. In closing, there is a lot of stuff I can say about there's a lot of stuff I can say for this review, but those other bits of information are more relevant to parts 2 and 3. So there is still more I can say. If you feel that I left anything out, I might talk about it in parts 2 and 3 when it becomes more relevant, when those themes become more relevant. So I shall stop now. Thank you for listening in.